Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you back to the Dynamic Decisions podcast, where we explore the strategies that drive successful decision making in the world of business. Why? Because the best decisions come from great conversations. I'm your host, Tisha Cable, CEO of C Model Data, and today we have an inspiring leader in innovation and technology strategy. His name is Phil. He's the president and CEO of Cable Labs, and he's the creator and host of the Killer Innovation Show. So Phil brings over 30 years of experience making billion-dollar innovation decisions and leading breakthrough technology initiatives at companies like HP and his own Cable Labs. So Phil, welcome to the show. I'm super excited to have you here today. I'm wondering if you could start by sharing more about your role at Cable Labs and how you lead innovation.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. Greatly appreciate it. Let me back up a little bit. I spent a decade as the chief technology officer for Hewlett Packard. Retired in the end of 2011. Thought I was retiring. That didn't last. Lasted 5 months, I think. My first book came out, Beyond the Obvious. And then I was actually recruited to become the CEO at Cable Labs. Cable Labs has been around for 38 years. It's a very unique organization. It's an R&D and innovation lab. We produce no products. We sell no services. We are funded by the broadband industry. The statistic we quote is 500 million people each and every day use at least one Cable Labs technology. So we're 200 employees, scientists, researchers, PhDs, and we invent the underlying intellectual property. But what is unique is we give away our IP to the vendor community. They pay us no royalties for it. So it's a very unique model, but I get to focus each and every day on inventing the future.
So first of all, it is a very interesting model. So Cable Labs, it has this very fascinating space. You're a nonprofit R&D consortium serving member companies who are also competitors in the market, which could create these unique dynamics around innovation sharing and competitive advantage. It could. Could you walk us through a moment when you had to decide whether to pursue a breakthrough technology that would dramatically benefit the industry overall, but might disproportionately advantage certain members over others? How would you navigate any of that tension between advancing the collective good versus managing individual member competitive concerns?
It's interesting that a lot of people focus in on is how do you drive collaboration against players that are big major players like Virgin Media in the UK is a member, Vodafone is a member, Comcast Xfinity here in the US, Rogers in Canada. When it was first formed, Cable Labs was first formed in 1988, all those players were much smaller. And they were competing against the big telco guys like AT&T and British Telecom. So they established a cooperation culture that still lives on to this day. It is very unique. The industry is very unique in the fact that people can come together and actually share and reveal what they're working on. We operate under the Federal Trade Commission Cooperative R&D Act, which allows an industry to come together and coordinate their R&D and not be in violation of antitrust rules, which is also very unique. And to date, I haven't run into an issue where we're focusing on solving an issue for one or disproportionate. It also helps with the fact that our funding model is we get paid a percentage of the members' gross revenue. So the biggest members pay the biggest portion of Cable Labs. The small players pay a much less portion, but it's the same proportion to everybody. So from that standpoint, you don't get into the situation where everybody's paying the same, but only one person is getting a disproportionate advantage. And I can take no credit for the model. It was created by John Malone way back in the day. He was one who brought the CEOs together to form Cable Labs. I'm the third CEO, and I've been here 13 going on 14 years now.
It's another one of those things where it feels like a real innovation in how to collaborate. It goes back to what you said a few moments ago. So it almost set up a way for this industry to grow without creating that conflict over time.
Cost of innovation is accelerating at such a fast pace. The days of any one company being able to do it on their own is passing everybody by. Look, even Microsoft or even OpenAI or HP today. When I was at HP, we had 350 PhD researchers in HP Labs. Today, HP Labs is a fraction of that size. IBM Research, fraction. Xerox PARC, pretty much non existent. Bell Labs, nowhere near what it used to be because it has the ability to collaborate to create the future is one, becoming increasingly tough. Two, many organizations are disincentivized by Wall Street. You needing to report your quarterly numbers disincentivizes long term investment. Executives have been beat up by analysts in Wall Street to focus on the quarterly short term continued growth versus being able to make 5-10 year bets. So organizations like Cable Labs is extremely unique. And in fact, if you think about it, Cable Labs does not have a peer in today's world. I've been out on the stump trying to convince other industries for them to create an industry. So it's kind of off the radar screen. It's not an internal where you have to show it as kind of a big expense. You share the expense over an industry and drive it. We actually spent 6 years standing up a Center for Medical Interoperability in Nashville, Tennessee for the healthcare industry. So it's a combination of hospital systems and technology developers, like Roche and GE Health and Philips to come together to become their own version of Cable Labs. And we actually took one of our employees and made them the CTO. So we're willing to try to invest to replicate the model. I think the model can be replicated, but you got to have an industry that's willing to come together and willing to collaborate. As you pointed out in your first part of the question, sometimes some industries aren't quite as cooperative as other industries.
Totally makes sense. Hey, so you've spent all these decades watching smart leaders kill breakthrough ideas. It's literally the focus of your killer innovation show. So the cable industry in itself faces particular pressure. Billions invested in existing infrastructure. You got regulatory constraints. You got consumer expectations for reliability that make experimentation really kind of risky. When you're evaluating an innovation that could revolutionize the industry, but it requires massive capital redeployment or short-term service disruption. How do you distinguish between the risk management side of this and the institutional conservatism that leaves you vulnerable to disruption from outside of the industry? If I could simplify the whole question, what decision-making frameworks help you identify which crazy ideas are actually the future?
Well, there's one of the things I put out there. It's in the book, and I don't know. There's like 10 or 11,000 organizations that use what we call the FIRE framework. So FIRE framework says, first of all, focus on what you're going to do. Search for ideas. The I in FIRE stands for ideation. Come up with your ideas. The third is ranking, R. So FIR, ranking. Most organizations do a very poor job of ranking your ideas. At HP, we would get 330 or 3,000, 3,500 ideas a year. How do you rank 3,500 ideas? How do you filter through this big pile of stuff and find the really good ideas? So in the case of what I teach in the book and what I tell on the podcast is what I've found over the years is define your ranking criteria in the form of questions.
Yeah.
So in the case at HP, we just used 5 questions, right? And you get a group of people, minimum of 8, all anonymous. So there's no executive influence here. And you score each question on a score of 0 to 5, right? 0 meaning absolutely not. 5 is, oh my God, yes, we answered that question, and it's crazy. Now, what I do tell people is you need to come up with your own ranking questions. You can use the ones in the book, or you can find them over at killerinnovations.com. And one of the we're now in season 21, so there's lots of content to go. You can go listen to. And that for Department of Education, I created a four set of questions for Department of Education to rank. We've done a lot of customizations on these, but when you have your ranking, what I found, if you have a minimum, if it's good questions, minimum of 8, and you do it anonymously, what you tend to find is the top 2 to 3% of your ideas bubble to the top, and then the rest of your ideas. So it's that top 2 to 3% then that you can focus in on. Now your question about some of these could be pretty big changes. How do you get an organization to change? Well, the first thing you have to recognize is you're going to run into innovation antibodies. These
Mhm.
are the people inside the organization who will say, oh, we can't afford it, or we've tried it before, or what makes you think that's a good idea? You're not an expert. We've all heard them all. The
Yes.
pushbacks that we get.
The
So
innovation
typically,
antibodies, I like
what's
that.
that?
Go ahead. The
Yeah. Yeah.
innovation antibodies.
Yeah. The innovation antibodies. These are, and look, not all of it's bad. Some antibodies inside of an organization are doing their job. So you talked about risk. People who are very anti-risk inside of organizations typically have one of two titles: chief financial officer, or they're the chief legal counsel, right?
That's right.
But that's their job.
That's
Their
their job.
job is to manage risk. So you just can't simply say, oh, they don't get it, throw your arms up and stomp out of the room. How do you convert an antibody into into being an advocate for the idea? First of all, take risk as seriously as they do. So, how do you take your idea? Maybe break it down. I'm a big believer in stage gate funding. So, you come in, you paint the big vision, but then you say, look, but what I really need right now is just $50,000 to prove the basic idea out. I'll come back to you in 90 days, and I'm going to answer these 5 questions based on the funding. 50,000. Go do an initial market validation. Go out and do a bunch of traveling, talk to customers, whatever it is. And then you come back to those same people and you say, okay, I spent the 50,000. I told you I would answer these 5 questions. Here are the 5 questions. All indication is this has got legs. So I need now $180,000 for the next stage. I'm going to answer these 5 questions. And so what you do is, it's the analogy I can give to this is, it's like, boiling the frog. You put the frog in the pot, but the water's cold, and then you just slowly turn the heat up. So you get 50,000, and you get 180,000, and it's 300,000, and it's 4 million, and then it's 8 million. But you
It's a
brought
turn.
them along. You're not asking them, write me a check for 25 million. I'll go away for 3 years, and trust me, I'll come back. Nobody is doing that these days. You won't even do it in venture. Venture capitalists don't go that route. That's
Yeah,
why they
no.
stage gate fund.
Milestones are incredibly important. What are we gonna achieve? What does this money actually do? I just think in general, outcomes are so important in that way. I don't think that you should even be planning without an idea of the outcome. It can be assumption based. That's okay. But we gotta validate and invalidate assumptions. That's the only way we
Well,
actually
you
make
can you can
progress.
use the scientific method, which is, what's your hypothesis,
Yeah.
what's your test,
Yeah.
and then what's the answer. Now, here's where you got to be brutally honest also with yourself. If you get out there and the idea is not working, be careful of becoming so passionate about the idea that you start twisting and turning it, right? There's pivots, that's perfectly valid. But I've seen some people get themselves in trouble where they start manipulating the answers in order to get that next funding gate versus really taking a good, hard, honest look. Does this make sense? Is this a real problem? Is this a problem I think though? But I go talk to customers. It's kind of a lukewarm thing. Now that also is not always a negative. Customers are never really a good source of validation of ideas. So in some cases, you do have to take that risk, but then you just got to be upfront and say, look, it's kind of warm, but here's why I think this is such a good idea. And I've tested these things out. So move to the next level. Steve Jobs, I knew Steve very well. Steve was very famous for his famous quote of saying, I'll tell the customer what they need. Like, I'm not asking for the customer to tell me what they need. I will tell them what they need. And so it's a tough balance. And what I warn people, if you're trying to lead an effort to take an idea forward and transform an organization, boy, you better have some thick skin because it's a long haul. But you cannot take the position of they just don't get it and you try to push it through. You have to empathize. You got to get those antibodies to come onto your side of the table and become those advocates. And there's actually a variety of different ways that I teach about how do you convert an antibody from an enemy to a supporter.
I like that. Okay, you're going to write that blog. That's going out in the market. It's going to be antibody to advocate. I like it. So wait. Okay, here's a question for you. So you're an innovation advisor. You're doing it right here, right now, right? So
Mhm.
you're an innovation advisor. You use the Tech Trend Group as a place where you do this work. You've
Yep.
encountered, I'm pretty sure you have encountered a ton of organizations that confuse activity with progress. So running design sprints, building innovation labs, talking about disruption while their core business model ossifies. When a client is investing millions in innovation theater, but resisting the organizational changes that would enable actual breakthrough thinking, how do you navigate telling them that their innovation strategy is fundamentally performative? I'm wondering if your insights could challenge leadership assumptions, help the leaders who feel criticized to simply choose. How do they make that choice and who's going to help them to validate their approaches? Walk me through your view there.
I wrote up on my Substack, I wrote a whole post on Stop Innovation Theater because it's very relevant. And, I wouldn't advise this, but I know a number of people have sent me notes on this. Some of them have just forwarded that blog post to their boss. It's actually innovation theater is very common, particularly with organizations that don't understand how hard it really is. The average lifespan of a chief innovation officer at a major company, let's call it Fortune 1000, chief innovation officer, is less than a year. The innovation officer gets frustrated because there's really no commitment. It's this theater, do demos, have media days, have investor days, that kind of thing. But they're not doing anything. They're not progressing anything. Or the corporation gets frustrated because they're not seeing the impact, not realizing how hard it is. You really gotta be willing to commit 3-year minimum if you're coming into an organization and you're trying to transform and create an innovation culture. Because you literally are changing the culture. If an organization does not have an established innovation culture, you need to go build it. Now, my advice is don't go after trying to rebuild an entire culture. Rebuild your team culture. Then build your division culture. And you expand out. You be the influencers to the rest of the organization. But you got to have leadership support. On Killer Innovations, there was a series of podcasts I did on what I call the 7 laws of innovation. And these are the 7 elements any organization has to have in place in order to be successful for innovation. Law number 1 is law of leadership. You got to have leaders. Maybe they don't understand innovation, the details of it, but they have to understand what their role is and how they have to really have that support. Another one is what we call law of resources. You need multi-year support for that funding and for those people and those resources, not quarterly start, stop, or annual budgeting cycles. So in fact, at Cable Labs, we don't do annual budgeting for the technology projects. We'll have projects we commit up front. We're going to fund that for 4 years. Done. It never gets relooked at. It doesn't have to go through the annual justification. We got this project. We got to re-justify because we're in the annual budget cycle. You
Yeah.
have to think differently. And I think it's not a bad thing to have appoint people to other organizations to show leadership how they're doing. But I can tell you one of the things I do spend a fair amount of time in is having CEOs call me because they're frustrated. And they want to be more innovative, but they can't seem to get the right element pieces together within the organization. In fact, I just finished the article for Substack on Monday, and it tells the story of Kroger, and how Kroger tried to do it face down. I helped them rethink it, and they went on to phenomenal success. John Osborne, who retired a few years ago, was head of innovation at Kroger, and his team, phenomenal team. It wasn't they were doing anything wrong, but you got a 130-year-old organization you're trying to come in and transform. So everybody's frustrated. The CEOs, leadership think they're doing the right thing. They just don't know what they should be doing. I don't think anybody's out there saying, okay, innovation's bad. The hard part is there's no magic 10-step formula. Every organization's different. Every culture is different. Every leadership structure is different. And I tell people is just Step back, take a deep breath, count to 10. This is a long haul. This is not a come in, click your heels, snap your fingers, woo, magic happens. It just doesn't happen.
Love it. Hey, a real quick message to our audience. I want you to think about your own innovation strategies. How are you fostering breakthrough ideas and making decisions that support long term growth? We'd love for you to share your experiences with us on LinkedIn and other social media using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. Okay, we're going to do my very favorite thing, which is a decision making assessment. I'm going to explore the way that you make decisions, the style through this persona assessment. And so I'll ask 4 questions that represent these different approaches. And then you're going to say how much it resonates with how you actually make your decisions. And you're going to have a scale of 0 to 100% for each one, but you only get 100% for all 4. And because you need to know this now, I'm going to ask them one at a time, and then you get to give a little color and insight for your answer. So I'm not going to give you all 4 up front. That's just because a lot of people ask, and I'm like, no, we're not doing that because then it's no fun for me. Okay, are you ready?
Go for it. Go
Okay,
for
the
it.
first one is called the feeler. It's a values driven leader. So this persona prioritizes core mission and considers the human impact of innovation decisions. So when considering new innovation initiatives or technology strategies at Cable Labs, I ask myself, beyond technical advancement, how does this decision affect the communities that depend on cable infrastructure? The students accessing online education, the remote workers connecting to opportunity, the elderly maintaining social connection. Innovation in telecommunications isn't abstract. It determines who gets left behind in an increasingly digital society. If we pursue a technology pathway that's elegant from an engineering perspective, but creates an affordability barrier that excludes lower income communities, we're not truly advancing connectivity. We're deepening digital divides. When member companies push for innovations that maximize their revenue per user over expanding access, how do I balance the consortium's sustainability against the mission to advance technology that serves everyone? What responsibility do we bear when our standards shape who participates in the digital economy? So, Phil, how much does approaching decisions through that social impact lens resonate with you?
Well, you probably could have read last week's Substack article on, on decision making. It was about journaling, how I use daily journaling to realize how I innovate and the kind of things that get me excited. And over the years, what I have found is basically answering the question you just posed, but not just specifically to cable, but more broadly about technology. Innovators or the industry tends to think, well, if it's new, then we should go build it. The question we should always ask ourselves is, okay, can I invent this? Yes. Next question is, should I invent this? Right? Should I really make this investment? And for instance, taking into consideration. And one of the things that I've had a project going on at Cable Labs for years is I've set a design target to be able to have a $10 cable modem in the field. Because there's entire swaths of our members that it's the cable modem, it's that cost of that box. Now we have radically reduced that box. An issue is, for instance, all the intellectual property we license royalty free. So when you go out to Best Buy and you buy your cable modem, we get paid nothing.
Right.
Flip side is you go buy a laptop, about $170 of your laptop is for patent licensing and patent litigation. We've taken that cost out to radically reduce the cost of devices. But it's a constant problem. So for me, when I look at balancing, and I can't anticipate what the next 3 questions are going to be, right? But this one's pretty important. So it's got to be 35-40% of the decision criteria, because it isn't just how
30.
fast can I make the network? In fact, I just announced last week in Washington, D.C., some work that we're doing in our research lab where we were able to get to 50,000 gigabits over a single strand of fiber. 50,000 gigabits, right? Now that's just showing what the advances of sciences are. But what's our cost per bit? And what's our energy, what we call picojoule per bit?
Yeah.
Are we driving those numbers down? And we have metrics that we target. And that feeds into the question. I could go off and just throw a bunch of power to drive high speed, but given the need for power generation, that doesn't work. So yeah, I'm gonna say it's probably 35 to 40%.
We're going to go 35 for you. Here we go. Here's your next one. It's called The Planner. It's a strategic visionary. So this persona focuses on long-term implications and future proofing, thinking several moves ahead across multiple scenarios. So when making strategic decisions about R&D investments or innovation programs, I'm looking for three divergent futures. In one scenario, and this is specifically about cable labs, G and wireless technologies commoditize connectivity, making cable infrastructure increasingly irrelevant unless we reinvent our value proposition around low latency, high capacity applications that wireless can't match. And another, demand for bandwidth explodes with immersive technologies and AI, where cables inherent advantages in capacity make it more essential than ever, but only if we invest now in the next generation architecture. And a third, regulatory changes around net neutrality and infrastructure ownership fundamentally reshape the business model, turning cable operators into utility like services with different innovation incentives entirely. Each future requires different technical capabilities and organizational structures. How do I guide R&D investments that position our members to lead regardless of which scenario unfolds without diluting focus so much that we are unprepared for any of them? So, Phil, how much does this multi-scenario approach drive your strategic thinking?
Well, fortunately for Cable Labs, that's pretty much what our charter is. So we're unique in that regards. We focus on what we call 3-year plus planning. Cable Labs doesn't have an influence on 0 to 3 years. That's our members, whether it be Vodafone or Virgin or whoever. So we break it down in 3 to 5, 5 to 8, 8 plus. Those are the buckets. If you think about our long-term work, it's about 10 to 12 to 14% of our spend is in that 5 to 8 to 10 years horizon. Those are high risks. And what I tell people is if you're not having 90% failure rate at that end of the curve, then you're not trying very hard. You're playing it too safe.
It's too safe.
And then when you once we come out of that phase and that it starts to have a little traction, then you're kind of in that 4 to 8 year time frame where you're now saying, how do I commercialize this? Could I make this something that could be effectively deployed? And then in that 5 to 3 years, that's where Cable Labs does its specification, the vendor ecosystem's engaged. We're in the planning cycles for the members for possible deployments, those kinds of things. So if you think about it from a spend and from a time perspective, it's about 10, 15% of our time is in those longer range and the planning horizons. Shockingly enough, most organizations, they do it maybe once a year through strategic planning exercises and then they forget about it. Versus at Cable Labs, we have people whose full-time job, 365 days a year, is to focus on that 5 to 10, 8 to 10 year horizon. It's not we're updating the strategic plan. Let's go think about scenarios.
Yeah.
And then go back to doing our normal job. Because then that's another form of theater. You're just doing it versus are you really doing it?
Right.
And so the question is how much of your budget and time are you committing to that effort?
I like that, and I like the fact that you're making clear that it's an ongoing exercise. This being ahead is managing to your outcomes yet again, right? It's being able to get your assumptions down, do all the work continually. This is how you continuously improve. But I think a lot of people get that annual planning bug, and that's all they really want to do. And then that just lives in a PowerPoint presentation that never has outcomes matched up against it. So that's
Well, I
really,
also tell people just for your own personal strategic planning, for your own personal career, right?
yeah.
You should put the same amount of discipline when you think about your own career. So, is your career worth you spending 3, 4 hours a week thinking about the long term, investing in yourself, preparing yourself for where you need to be? If you're not willing to do that individually, then is it fair to ask your organization to make those long-term investments, the best way to do it, exercise, do it yourself. Are you thinking long-term in your own efforts, in your own career, in along the same lines?
So what's your percentage there? You're going 10 or
10 to
15?
15, 10 to 15%.
I know you like these ranges. These ranges are fantastic in real life, but on this podcast, you got to pick one.
Then I'm probably going to I'll take it to 15.
Okay, you're going to go 15. Okay. Awesome. All right.
So that gets
So
me, I'm at 50%, and you got me two more questions.
that's right. You ready? You're doing a great job, by the way. Here's the next one. It's called the counter. It's the challenger of assumptions. So this persona questions industry orthodoxies and finds opportunities in contrarian thinking. So when evaluating the innovation landscape, I ask, what fundamental assumptions about cable telecommunications might be dangerously wrong? The industry has optimized for decades around the assumptions that controlling the physical infrastructure, the last mile into homes, is the sustainable advantage. But what if that's backwards? What if, in a software defined edge computing world, real value isn't the pipe, but the intelligence at the network edge? While everyone's racing to increase bandwidth and reduce latency through infrastructure investment, what if there are software defined approaches that deliver better experiences without requiring massive capital deployment? When I'm deciding whether to double down on cable's traditional advantages or pivot toward capabilities that leverage our position differently, how do I avoid the trap where conventional wisdom leads us to perfect obsolescence? Is there opportunity precisely because we're not bound by the same quarterly pressures as our member companies? How much does that contrarian perspective shape any of your decisions?
Well, it does a lot, from the standpoint of constantly wanting to reevaluate. We have work that Cable Labs has done. We've published it. You can find it on the website. We call eras. There's three distinct eras that we have seen in the broadband network. There's the speed era, and we're coming out of that. And cable has done a phenomenal job. 92% of U.S. homes have access to a minimum of 1 gig service, in the United States, 92%.
Here's the last one. It's called the data driver. It's an evidence based decision maker. So this persona relies on metrics, analytics, and concrete evidence to validate innovation decisions. So before committing to major R&D programs or technology standards, I ask myself, what evidence reveals which innovations will create genuine industry value versus impressive technical achievements that nobody deploys? I want rigorous analysis distinguishing between metrics that demonstrate technical success, throughput improvements, latency reduction, spectral efficiency gains, and indicators that predict actual market adoption, like member willingness to invest in deployment, consumer willingness to pay for capabilities, competitive positioning against alternative technologies. Here's the paradox: the technical metrics that prove our innovations work are immediately measurable in lab environments, but the market outcomes that reveal whether we've created real value, like subscriber growth, revenue impact, competitive advantage, often take years to manifest and depend on deployment decisions that we don't all the time control. So, how do I build evidence based conviction in our innovation direction when the most important validation, whether members actually implement our standards and consumers respond, lags years behind the investment decisions? So, Phil, how much does this evidence seeking approach guide any of your choices?
Well, it's a great question. The key is at what stage are you convinced enough to make the big investment? You have to be also a little careful because if you're the further you get out, once you get past 3, 4, 5 years, as I remind people, I can make a spreadsheet lie as good as anybody else can make a spreadsheet lie, right? So you've got to be a little careful about what does that really mean. So we hold an annual event, a 2-day meeting for our board of directors here in Colorado. So we have a 40,000 square foot lab facility here near Boulder. We bring the CEOs and their chief technology officers to Colorado for 2 days, and we show them the really long range pieces. And what we do is we demonstrate them and then sign up, and they say, okay, I'll be the field trial for that, or I'll be the field trial for that. And then the test is can we transition the work from being done at Cable Labs in our research lab to their labs, to their teams. That's step one. Step two is there a field trial? Can they carve out maybe a smaller segment of their market? Can we hand build some hardware and can we put it out there and can we actually test it? Can we try it out and see how it goes? And so therefore it becomes back to the stage gating. It's not just stage gating for funding, it's stage gating for proof. How do I get there? Because if I'm thinking it's 5 years from now, how rigorous can you really be about knowing what customers' needs are going to be 5 years from now? One of the questions I use in my innovation bootcamp course is what customer segment's going to emerge 5 years from now that does not exist today? The variety of ideas on what new customer segments are going to emerge all over the map. That's just proof that we don't have really, as humans, we're not very good. Any futurist who says they can nail it, I'm going to call BS on, because I've spent 25, 30 years of my career. My whole job is making sure that my organizations, whether it was at HP or whether at Cable Labs, is ready for whatever that range of possible futures will look like when it emerges. So, for us, it is an important part of that process. You have to have some validation. You just can't stick your finger in the air and go, oh, it feels like this. But at the same time, you do have to apply some form of rigor because our members are running billion-dollar businesses. They're not taking whims. Depending on what you're trying to do, you could be a huge distraction factor, taking their day-to-day people's eye off the ball. So how do you do this? How do you prove it out and merge it in to the process of the ongoing business? But for us, it's about our annual 2-day event, transitioning it to the labs, to the members, doing field trials, getting vendor ecosystems aligned and specifications written, and then market launches. It's kind of like taking a bite at the apple. It's kind of a version of stage gating, and you get proof, particularly when you got it real, when someone go touch it, bang on it, see it, poke around on it, those kinds of things. Now, I've been involved with some technologies, healthcare in particular, where it's hard to do that. And the amount of investment up front to do healthcare, medical devices, those types of things, it can be incredibly hard to prove it out. But in that case, there you're proving the science. Do you not violate a fundamental law of science or the fundamental, those types of things? Then that becomes the validation to move forward. So I don't know if I've given you an answer that's a magic one formula, but you have to have some form of proof. You have to have the proof that's appropriate for what you're trying to do within the program you've got.
So are you going to apply your last 25 to that and say
Yeah,
that's
it actually worked out pretty good because that's right in the range I would have given it. We actually have a whole dedicated team, internal strategy group, and we've got people that are ex McKinsey's. We have PhD economists on our staff that do economic theory analysis. So what's the future cost of a network that's going to be 5 years from now? We do economic prediction models. So looking at all bands of consumers and what are they going to be able to afford to pay and what's the kind of services they need. So it's not just an afterthought. We're actually doing it.
So you know what? There are a couple of things, and then we're going to wrap this up. I have one final thing for you, but what I love, first of all, 35% feeler, 15% planner, 25% counter, and 25% driver. But the thing that I got out of this the most for me was you made very clear that for every one of these, to make it real in an organization, there are two things. There's a journey. And so in that journey, there are stages for each one of them. No one of them is one thing all the time. And the second one that makes it real is your investment. You talked about your investment in planning, your actual literal investment in team members who focus on doing that work, your actual investment in team members who focus on the data culture of your organization. And so that journey lends itself to process, right? And it lends yourself to the places where you can check to see if you're doing good and bad, if your outcomes are being met. And that investment makes it, there is no theater here, right? It makes it, this is real, hard-coded behavior. So I really appreciate that, and I hope that our audience picks up on that, that those are two things that can make anything that you're doing real, whether it's brand new and new to the world or something that you're trying to just improve upon in your organization, a new innovation. So an innovation on something existing or an innovation of something that's brand new. So, hey, we're wrapping up. You've shaped strategies for some of the world's leading technology organizations, and you created platforms that really empower breakthrough thinking. I would love for you to share what you believe the most important insight is that you could give to leaders who might be trying to distinguish between innovation theater and genuine breakthrough thinking.
That's a tough one. You could use the 3M model, which is what percentage of your revenue comes from innovations you've introduced in the last 2 to 3 years. The 3M metric that's out there. But my definition of innovation is ideas made real. Ideas that you don't execute on is a hobby, and I'm not in the hobby business. It's about taking that idea and getting it out there. Now, it may not get out there in the form you want. You've got this big vision, and you end up delivering maybe a portion of it just to kind of get it started. That still counts. At HP, with the innovation program office that I formed, and you can read about it. Harvard and Stanford both did case studies on the HP IPO. We metriced the IPO team to have 3 fundamentally new products launched every year. When I started at HP, we were 30 billion. When I retired, we were 120 billion, 240,000 employees at the end of 2011. And we gave them a 3-year window. No deliverables the first 3 years. It started in year 4. And I was there for a decade. Every year they beat the number. They would average 4 to 5 launches a year. What you measure counts versus just saying, did we do good demos? Did we get the article? Did we make it onto the Fast Company list of being most innovative? Did an executive get written about as being the most creative? My PR people don't even call me anymore for those kinds of articles or interviews because I'm just not interested. Because innovation's a team sport. Build your team.
Build your team. Good stuff. Phil, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all of your insights. It's been such a wonderful time having you. Would you tell our audience where they can learn more about you and more about Cable Labs?
So if you're interested in Cable Labs, you can just go to cablelabs.com. And we post the blogs there about all of our research and work and what's going on. If you're interested in following me, they can follow me over on LinkedIn. And that's my primary social media platform. My blog is at philmckinney.com. I write a weekly article, so you can find Phil McKinney's studio notes over on Substack, or you can follow the YouTube channel, and I publish a weekly video. The videos are much more instructional, how to actually do the process of innovation. So you can find me on every social media as Phil McKinney, all one word, no spaces. I've got the same handle everywhere. That's what you get for being old and being around when all the social media platforms were created. You could commandeer your social media platform names everywhere.
That's fantastic. Phil, thank you again. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Remember, the best decisions come from great conversations. If you enjoyed this episode, we want you to rate it, subscribe it, share it with your network. Keep the conversation going on social media using Dynamic Decisions Podcast. And until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep leading with purpose.